So when I was hired as Doug Trumbull's assistant on the movie Close Encounters, he said, well, the story calls for clouds being generated in the sky. Now we know we can create clouds when we pour cream in our coffee, but we need to be able to photograph that and get it to a larger scale. So they gave me $20 in petty cash and 20-gallon aquarium and said, okay, can you go ahead and figure this out? So by the end of the week, I'd worked it out and had different conversations with them. And essentially we fill up half the tank. Now, to do the effects for Close Encounters, I actually built a large aquarium tank that was 7 feet by 7 feet by 4 feet tall. I think it held 2,000 gallons, as I recall. So we would filter water in 2 large wine vats, essentially hot tubs, and filter that to get rid of any impurities. And we'd add salt to one. So we fill that tank halfway with salt water, and then the top half with fresh water, just to avoid mixing it. Then we'd mix up some white tempera paints, which is a water-based paint, fresh water, and inject that with syringes and other things into the fresh water. And then that would cause it to bloom out just like cream in your coffee, but because of the salt water, it wouldn't go down to the bottom. It would just sit there, just like a real cloud does on an inversion layer with pressure. So for Dream Quest, a number of us were working on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. That was the first Star Trek movie itself. And as that was starting to wind down, the electronics person and myself were looking at some potential projects, and Hoyt Yeatman and Rocco Giaffre and myself were looking at possible film projects and things. And at that time, of course, we were going project to project, and we thought, well, what if we set up a little company to do specialized electronic computer projects, and also what if we did visual effects? Maybe we could set up a small company to do so. So the Rocco, Hoyt, and myself actually looked for a house to rent during Star Trek, and we rented a house that had a large garage. And we gutted the garage, painted it black, insulated it, and we formed a company at the end of Star Trek. And we actually did Caddyshack, the map names for Caddyshack in that garage. We did all the computer graphics for Escape from New York, which were essentially modeled buildings, just black models with white lines, because people were not actually doing computer graphics at that time because it was fairly impractical for most uses. So we actually did a number of projects, and then Doug Trumbull got in Blade Runner and asked us to do the video effects and things for that. So we went ahead and moved into a larger facility and did a number of the video displays for Blade Runner. And we set up a whole facility. We had an animation stand, we had an optical printer, we had a slit scan rig, graphics rig, and a motion control stage. And so we did quite a number of projects there. We did Blue Thunder, the original V series. We did the title sequence for One from the Heart, and in that case we'd actually be working on one project during the day in one place with the motion control because we'd only built one. Then we'd load it into a truck, drive to Hollywood, go onto the stage, hook it up, and then shoot all night, and then repeat the process. So each of us contributed. There were a total of 6 co-owners, which was one, and I was the founding president. And Hoyt and I were kind of the effects supervisors at that point. So it was a great experience, great learning experience. We got a lot of hands-on. We understood, learning the whole budgeting procedures and the rest of it. So I did that for approximately 5 years, and by the time I left, we had a crew of over 60 people working on some of the projects. So some very interesting projects, but it's difficult to be both a co-owner and a business manager and an effects supervisor at the same time. You're kind of spread too thin. And with 5 other equal co-owners, people would have different views on how the company should be run. So I went ahead and left for ILM, which is in Northern California, and I had a young daughter at that point, thought it would be a better fit up in Northern California, and there I could focus on some of the creative and technical aspects rather than having to deal with all the business aspects at that point. So Commotion originally started as a program I called Flipbook, because I wanted to go ahead and see shots on the computer. I wanted to check them out as we were working. And that was, once again, in the very early days of computer graphics. And so we'd have to send the pictures one by one to an Abacus system, which was a digital disc recorder. And everybody would queue up, and then you'd have to wait for it to be on there, and then you'd have to view it, and there were limitations and so forth. So one of the reasons I became self-taught in electronics and computers is because I wanted tools to be able to do things. So I thought, well, I've got this Macintosh, a color Macintosh, what can I do with it? Can I perform this? So one of the first tasks I did is, can I bring in images and play them back quickly? And I figured out a methodology to do that, which was kind of unheard of at that time. This was actually even before QuickTime was available. So, and what little movies there were all like 160 by 120 resolution, but I wanted to deal at least with video resolution, if nothing else. So I went ahead and developed that, and that was called Flipbook, because I could quickly cycle images. The other thing, I was an effects supervisor at that time, and we talked to the computer people at ILM and said, well, what if, talking about compositing systems, and we talked about a flowchart system, which you now see with things like Nuke and so forth. And at that time they said, oh, that's a huge project, it's going to take a couple of years to make. So that's kind of, I take those types of things as a challenge. So I went home and in 2 weeks had a working compositor based on a flowchart. So you would take icons from different functionalities, link them up, and this is all before After Effects or any, most of those other types of things. And so we could composite as well. So I had the program there at ILM, and actually computer graphics people saw it and said, oh, well that's great, we should just use this for playing back. And they used that as their guide for developing some of the software that they did. So some of the people at ILM really responded to it, and this was something I was working on nights and weekends. It wasn't something ILM was paying me to do. And so I went ahead and worked on it, and Forrest Key was one of the people that became very excited by it. He was working in editorial there at the time. And when I finished up on Dragonheart, I went to a few different companies to see if they might be interested. The people who make Painter and Adobe and a couple other companies to see. And they all went, well, it's interesting, but we don't know what to do with it, because it was more of a professional tool. And I put in a number of roto tools and things. But so Forrest said, look, let's set up a company. And I said, fine, if you can go ahead and run it, because I had experience running a company. I just didn't want to deal with all the paperwork and all the business aspects if I could avoid it. So that's what we created, and we raised money and formed a company. And when we released the product, initially probably 95% of it was my code. And then as time permitted, we brought on different programmers, and we had, I think, 20 programmers, something like that. And we had a company that had like 30 people working at it, called Puffin Designs. And we were selling Commotion all over the world. And all these other companies were using it because it's a great tool for doing paint work and for doing roto and all the things. And you could do it on a desktop computer at that time. That was before a lot of the other packages were available. So people who were working on, $100,000 or $200,000 flame systems would roto it and do paint work and so forth on Mac, and then port it over. Just take those images over, because that became much more efficient. And then at a certain point, Pinnacle Systems offered us, offered to buy out the company, and we decided to go ahead and do that. Unfortunately, they focused most of their attention on taking the programmers and having them work on their editing program. Pinnacle was subsequently purchased by Avid, who did absolutely nothing. So I spent a little bit of time, because I still get emails to this day saying, hey, well, when are you going to come out with Commotion that I can actually buy? Because quite frankly, it still does a number of things that After Effects and Silhouette and Mocha and some of the other tools don't do, you know. And because I designed it and I was working with other visual effects people and making it better, we came at it from a user standpoint. So I could say, oh, well, it'd be great if we could do this other little thing or that thing, which a lot of the other products come from an engineer going, oh, I think this would be good. And you know, they're trying to solve problems that you may not have, or ignoring problems that you actually have. So, but unfortunately, Avid did nothing with it. I contacted them a number of times to see about maybe repurchasing and so forth, but that just kind of dragged out. And at this time, that was written before OS 10 even. So at this point, I'd have to rewrite it from scratch. So occasionally I think, oh, well, maybe, you know, with enough demand, maybe I might do something. But I think, oh, well, I've already done that. I don't really want to spend another 6 months or a year developing it, redeveloping it. You know, I want to move on to other projects. So that's, you know, unfortunately where that stands. I went to work for ILM and I spent approximately 20 years there. Now, I had experience working with Dennis Buren, who was one of the main people at ILM, certainly one of the main visual effects supervisors at ILM. He and I worked together in shooting all the mothership shots for Close Encounters. And so he called us once they were, you know, ILM started in Los Angeles, in the Valley, and once Star Wars was completed, George moved most of the company up north to north of San Francisco, and the part that remained behind was basically a group of guys who were involved with the original ILM formed Apogee. So some of the people from the original ILM went north, and some of the people created Apogee. So once they were established in Northern California, we got a call, Hoyt Yeatman and myself, about going up there and helping with some projects like Empire Strikes Back. We said, well, that's, you know, really tempting, but we're just in the process of setting up our own company called DreamQuest at that time. So we wanted to give it a chance, because we knew if we got up there and got tied up, then, you know, we'd keep delaying things. So we were asked 2 or 3 times during the next few years to move up and help them with some of their projects. We also did some work for them on the ET, where you see the clay balls floating around like the solar system. They sent that work to us. We're not credited in the movie, but we actually did that because that was going to be very difficult with the systems they had. But see, we were equipped to deal with some of those specialized things, because I could program certain things on the motion control that they weren't able to do. So at a certain point in Los Angeles and at DreamQuest, I decided, okay, I've done this for 5 years. I would like to go ahead and switch it up. So I went ahead and called Dennis and said, you know, I'm thinking about leaving DreamQuest, you know, is there anything up there? And he said, well, we don't have any visual effects supervisor spots open right now, but we have technology things. You know, we stopped developing cameras and things a year or 2 earlier, and we really need to get back to doing some of those types of things. So I went up there and they hired me, and so I moved on, did that, and then as visual effects projects came up, I became involved in those. So I did some specialty projects like a Star Trek theme ride thing that I directed. Was involved in quite a few commercials over the 20-year time, and I directed a number of commercials there as well. I directed the Space Race show scan movie, and I supervised, I think my main feature film supervision there was Hunt for Red October. And that was being done ILM had bid on that project. It went to another effects facility in Los Angeles, and they worked on it for approximately 9 months or a year and had not achieved what the director or the studio wanted, and they were missing their deadline. So I came on, and we had like 60 days to do 60 shots, you know, and once again, that was sort of on the cusp of digital. We did some digital particle things, but everything else was all miniatures, and the director wanted some additional things, but one of the shots we had to actually cut in half because it was so long. Our system could not deal with it, so we had to go in opticals and actually composite those two shots together. So, and then over the years I worked on quite a few projects. The Mask I worked on as an effects supervisor, so I oversaw all that work, and that was nominated for visual effects. I worked on Dragonheart and as the visual effects supervisor, so I was nominated for an Academy Award for that. I worked on Star Wars: The Phantom Menace as one of the 3 visual effects supervisors, so I was nominated for that. I received an Academy Technical Award for the work I did on the input scanner, because in trying to get ILM into the digital age, I worked on trying to get scanners and other types of things, and one of those was contacting Kodak and saying, well, I read in this technical paper you guys are developing a 3-color scanner. You know, so I met with their chief engineer and discussed it, and we worked out an arrangement so that we would go ahead and design with them and build this scanner system. So that became the starting point for a lot of the BI and other things, you know, everybody takes for granted today. But at that time there were no digital cameras, so everything had to originate on film. And then, like I said, it worked on quite a few other Time Machine. You know, I'd have to look at my list to remember. And I also worked on a number of TV show pilots and specialty types of projects and things. So it was great, because at ILM you had an entire crew of very talented people, very knowledgeable people. So if you sat down with them and said, hey, you know, I've got this idea, la la la, you know, and then I'd say, well, what do you think about this? And we'd work it out, and you knew that you had great talent behind you, so you could assign somebody to animate something or do something. And because technically I was on project by project, but I basically kept busy almost all those 20 years, and so I would, as I say, it would bounce from commercials to feature films to television work, you know, anything that would come up, you know. So all that part was great. Now, management over the years had changed, and about 2004 or so, as I finished up Van Helsing, management was changing yet again, and they were going to be moving into the city, so the commute time, you know, typically we're working 12-hour plus days, so the commute time was going to be another probably hour, or at least 45-minute added to an already long commute. So I thought, well, maybe it's the time to start thinking about freelancing, because at that time there were a number of visual effects studios out there, and a lot of the feature film at that point was being broken up into across 15 different companies. So even as an effects supervisor at ILM, I may only be doing like one sequence, and the other was being done by this company in that sequence. And so the studios were hiring independent visual effects supervisors, of which ILM might only do a small piece. And then it's just trying to have an overall vision and work with the director was what I was interested in. So that's why I left ILM and became a freelance visual effects supervisor.